Hey, Atlanta, Apple is open for small business. That's right. We're here to make starting and running your business simpler. With privacy and security built in on all devices, it's easy for you to protect your customers' data. And if you need hardware or software support, you'll get advice from business experts at no cost whatsoever. So you can focus more on the soup du jour and less on, the other stuff. At Apple, we're open for your small business. Go to apple.com/small business or visit an Apple store to learn more.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouth-watering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Okay, Kobi, so despite the fact that this is not a story you particularly enjoy and it's not your favourite version of it, why don't you tell us a little bit about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves?
On a rare occasion you got to pick a movie. You pick a movie about a story and characters you don't care about. That's 2.5 hours long. Cool, okay.
You know how to live, mate.
Not insignificant problems aside, and Kevin Costner being like a human whiteboard, those things not aside, it's a fun bomb. Why? Why was he like this sex symbol action hero? He's so bland.
Hello all, returning for the second part of this special 300th episode. We have joining Flixwatcher today, Helen.
Hello.
It's Kobi.
It's good to be back, guys. Thank you.
And again, as your special anniversary hosts, Martin.
Hi.
And Sam, that's me. And we are here today to talk about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Not Men in Tights, right?
Prince of Tights.
Thanks, as always, to the mighty people for their mighty, mighty tunes, and thanks to Ben from Rockwood Audio for his awesome editing skills.
Please do remember to write a review and rate the show on Apple Podcasts or any way you listen to podcasts. It really does help.
And you can join the conversation with us on Twitter.
At FlixWatcherPod or on Instagram.
At Flixwatcher. Hello, film fans. We're back with Flixwatcher. It is once again myself, Sam, and my co-host Martin taking over the reins of the show to allow your regular hosts to pick their own films, not to be ruled by the whims of their guests. So they get to choose the film they fancy. The guests today, therefore, are Kobi and Helen. Helen, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Hello, listeners. Thanks for listening. If you've been listening from the start as well. It's a lot of episodes. We've covered a lot of films and Netflix just keep changing it and adding more. So as long as there's films and guests who are willing to come on and chat with us, then we will keep going. I'm usually found on this podcast complaining about films that are more than an hour and a half long. That's me.
And Kobi, what are you usually found complaining about?
I'm usually found complaining about the fact I don't like horror, but then also liking some good horror. So that's kind of me. And if someone had said when we started this, how long do you think you'd be doing this podcast for? I would have said, I don't know. If they had also asked, do you think you'd be doing it for 300 episodes? I'd be like, no. So
that's a lot. That's a lot of episodes.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We do talk about the fact myself and Helen are in a kind of really privileged position, the fact we rarely pick the films. And if we did pick the films every episode, it would be kind of stale very quickly. So, but it is nice to once every 100 episodes to pick our films. So I'm excited to talk about this one, I guess.
Well, it's a pleasure for us to join you sitting in the guest host chairs. Myself and Martin, we regularly host the Song by Song podcast.
Award-winning Song by Song podcast.
Indeed, that award that we won. Martin, why don't you tell the listeners a little bit about that?
Oh, it's just Song by Song is a podcast about the music of Tom Waits. Every episode we talk about a different one of his songs. It's great if you like his music because we talk about his music a lot. And if you don't know his music, it's a good way in. And also he's done a lot of films, it turns out, for a musician. He's also kind of somewhat of an actor. You can dig into our back catalogue and find some of, frankly, very good films he's been in, like Ballad of Buster Scruggs and Fisher King, and then some of the not so good films you may not have heard of that are nevertheless still kind of curious and worth a watch.
As long as you didn't say Bram Stoker's Dracula in there, because that's top tier. And I think that's where I knew Tom Waits first. I didn't realise that he was the singer. I just knew him from that film.
He plays Renfield. Who's been playing Renfield in that
Nicholas
new...
Hoult.
Nicholas Hoult.
Nicholas Hoult, right. So yeah, he's like a young, old Nicholas Hoult, if that makes sense. So if you don't know his work, just picture that.
That's really confusing. I'm not sure about my own podcast now. We have also been doing our show for a ridiculous number of episodes.
Yeah, I was going to ask.
But we've done over 400 songs now. We've done something like 40 films, 350 releases plus. So we're nearly done, guys. We're nearly done.
It's our last year. So tune in this year to get them fresh. Otherwise
Yeah, join us with some confidence that we will stop at some stage in the relatively near future.
Yeah.
But we always know what we're talking about. Obviously, the songs of Tom Waits have been laid out for us very clearly. But what was not laid out for you was the film we're going to discuss today. Kobi, it was your pick. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the film we're going to be watching and also a very strict 60-second synopsis, please?
Yeah, this is a film that was kind of everywhere when it first came out. And I'm trying to think, was it just the song that made it everywhere? Because that film was like the whole of, I can't remember what year it came out, but it was the whole year, wasn't it? Number 91, which is kind of insane now. That it was a film, a song was like there for half a year in ether. And I realized as I watched this, that most of the films I remember, most of the parts of this film I remember were the bits used in the music video.
Yes. Yes, 100%.
Which made me think, how many times did I actually watch this film before this rewatch? Certainly once, I'm sure, but were there just fractions of other times? I don't know. It'd be interesting to discuss and see what your guys' thoughts are on that as well. I like picking old films that I haven't seen in a while for this because it's kind of good to see where your head's at now versus when it was when you first watched it and what you thought then versus now. And I think this might be quite an interesting one for discussion on that point.
I mean, you've been beating around the bush, Kobi. What is the film? What's the name of the film?
The film is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Yeah. Should I get ready for the synopsis?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. On the count of 3, 1, 2, 3, synopsize.
So this is one in an umpteenth number of tellings of the fable, the legend that is Robin Hood, who lived in Sherwood Forest with a bunch of merry people. Perhaps not my favourite iteration of Robin Hood. That would be Maid Marion and her merry men. And Robin Hood's quite interestingly a character which I'm not particularly interested in. I don't think I've run out to see any other films of this character. So you know the story. Is a guy comes back from somewhere, robs from the rich to give to the poor, yada, yada, yada. This time it's got Moor and Freeman in it, which is unusual for the story and retelling.
Well, there are a few beats in this film that are common to all of the tellings of this myth, right? Like he's in the Crusades, he comes back, King Richard is still off at the Crusades, his brother King John is a baddie, Sheriff of Nottingham is his local emissary, he's a baddie, and Robin falls in love with Maid Marion, and she's captured, and at some point he rescues her, and
he knows how to use a bow and arrow really well.
He's really good with the bow and arrow. Yeah, and then there's a few like characters that come in. Like there's a quarterstaff fight with Little John, who's a big guy with the quarterstaff.
That tends to happen, doesn't it? Yeah.
There's drunk Friar Tuck that turns up. It hits a lot of the beats of the myth that I was taught as a kid.
Is he always an anthropomorphic fox, or is that only some of the time?
Oh, I think you watched the wrong film. Are you on Disney Plus? This is not Disney Plus Watcher.
Oh, nightmare.
Why doesn't Kevin Costner have a tail?
Okay, Kobi. So despite the fact that this is not a story you particularly enjoy and it's not your favourite version of it, why don't you tell us a little bit about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves?
On a rare occasion you got to pick a movie. You pick a movie about a story and characters you don't care about. That's 2.5 hours long. Cool. Okay.
You know how to live, mate.
It's an opportunity to revisit like your youth when you pick old films. So it's interesting because I love it when you come back and you see an actor in probably the first time you've seen them, and now they're in a different stage of life. I'm not talking about Kevin Costner. I'm talking about Morgan Freeman here, who whenever I see him in film now, I'm like, damn, this guy's amazing. And this is probably the first film I saw him in. I didn't realize I think he's great in this film. He's the only black actor in the film. And I think that in all of Robin Hood film stories I've seen, Barrington, of course, in Maid Marion and the Merry Men.
Yeah.
They kind of lead into that. They kind of lead into talking about wenches and things like that. And, you know, there's kind of light-hearted allusions to making fun of sexual assaults in this. So it was very much kind of like of the 90s kind of...
We should talk about that.
Of the 90s kind of vibe, wasn't it? And I think it's still kind of holds up. I wouldn't say that don't watch it. I wouldn't put a warning against this film before it because I think it's kind of its time. It's slightly quaint. It kicks up. I think it's better in the second half than it is at the end, at the start.
Strongly agree. Yeah.
I think it gets more interesting. I remember Alan Rickman being better in it than on this watch. It's still an interesting performance, but I don't know. I thought it was very pantomimey on this rewatch.
I mean, it's all he's got to work with, isn't it, really? I mean, it's either... Like, he can't go subtle, he can go big, or he can go boring, and he chose to go very big.
I mean, the story is that he chose to go bigger than the film required, that he got friends to punch up the script so he could be silly.
Ruby Wax was one of them, yeah.
Yeah, Ruby Wax worked on the script. Yeah.
It's an interesting take. Martin, how about you? How does this stack up to your experience of the early 90s?
That's a great question. Less stoned than I remember. No. I agree with Kobi. I think the first half is a little slow. And there's various things you can sort of pick on in terms of, like, they've made attempts to bring it up to date a little bit, but largely failed. I mean, they've got like a black character, but he's sort of like meant to be Persian or something. So, you know.
He's a Moor, which was, yeah.
So he's like like Arabian, but then they don't really specify where these crusades are happening at the beginning of the film. That you meet this character, and you know, and he's a sort of in a life debt to Robin Hood, and that's, you know, that gives us this sort of interesting buddy characteristic. Maid Marion, when you meet her, is sort of badass and a ninja, and like basically bests Robin until he, you know, manages to finally overcome her in combat. But by the end of the film, she's completely passive, like not only not showing off any of her ninja skills, also just sort of standing there while the Sheriff of Nottingham's about to like spear him with a sword. And like the best she manages is like, hey, over here, you know, like she could have clonked him with a candlestick or something. Anyway, so that's interesting. Like it's a sort of like a slightly watered down attempt to bring the story, make it relevant for modern audiences. That said, it's pretty fun in places. There's some real big problems that Kobi has alluded to, like the wedding night. Alan Rickman trying to have sex with Elizabeth Mastrantonio against her will in the middle of a wedding ceremony. It's sort of played for laughs. It's so ridiculous. I didn't feel that offended by it, but once you actually start to think about it, it's really fucked up. So don't do that. But yeah, like lots of those not insignificant problems aside, and Kevin Costner being like a human whiteboard, those things aside, it's a fun romp. Why? Like, why was he like this like sex symbol action hero? He's so bland. Like the best he can do is just sort of speak lines up like in a constant soft voice. But he was in like Dances with Wolves, JFK. Like these were all huge films. He's just forgettable. Anyway.
Well, he wrote and directed Dances with Wolves, I guess, so he can get a pass for that.
Did I do it? Oh, he directed it. Oh, okay. Because apparently the only reason he worked on this was that one of the, I think, second unit directors for Dances with Wolves was attached to this project, and he was like, I'm not interested. And then he found out this director was doing it, and he was like, oh, cool. He's also called Kevin.
Yes, confusingly.
I think Kevin Costner was like, oh, if it's another Kevin, I'm like, it's like, I will only be directed by Martin Scorsese. So then the rules, I don't make them.
I've got no
It's a
chance.
generational thing. All the Marvel films required everyone to be called Chris. In the 90s, it was everyone called Kevin. Next. I mean, I'm hoping for some big profile Sams to help me get some work in Hollywood.
Sam Mendes?
He doesn't return my calls anymore, sadly. Helen, how do you feel about the human whiteboard starring Robin Hood?
So this was my first time watching it.
Holy shit.
I have not seen this film before.
Fuck.
I have seen Bryan Adams performing it 16 times for the 16 weeks it was number one. I think it was mostly the video, maybe.
Was it only 16 weeks?
Yeah. I mean, that is a long time.
For some reason, I just thought it was like the whole year.
Yeah. 60, it's the longest ever number one, 16 weeks.
Really?
Yeah. I think as they were like Top of the Pops went on and on, they just shortened the video because it's quite a long song. So I kind of felt as though I'd seen a lot of it. It's very hammy. I don't know what I was expecting. There's so much ham in it. It's like there's more ham than the ham aisle. There's so much soundtrack as well. It's overpowering amount of soundtrack going on. Yeah, I agree. The first half is a little bit slow. Second half is much more action orientated. There's a couple of like funny bits. So Mr. Whiteboard, I was going to say maybe it was him swimming in the lake, but that wasn't actually Kevin Costner. It was a stunt double. So It's not even his arse that you get to see.
What?
No,
that's the only reason I watched that film.
This is not Kevin Costner. I wasn't immune to, I wasn't like Kevin Costner blind. I was much more of a bigger fan of The Bodyguard rather than this one. So that's
that was another huge movie.
Yeah. It was a huge soundtrack, yeah.
And there's some really, really funny bits in it. Like there's a bit in it where Christian Slater, who's in it, and he's very American, he's very cool, bro. And when they fly over the thing, he says, "Fuck me, he cleared it," which is clearly not how they spoke in the olden times. So there's moments like that which are completely hilarious, and you're just like, what is going on in this film?
That's another ad lib. The Christian Slater "fuck me, he cleared it" was a joke for the director. They left in.
Yeah, and then there's a funny bit where they jump off a wall and land on some hay.
No, isn't that the same one? Where they clear it and then two separate ones, okay.
Yeah, the hay happens quite early on. They jump off a wall and both jump on a bale of hay. It's just really funny. And then later on he gets catapulted. They both get catapulted, and that's the he cleared it. I mean,
land in some different hay.
Yeah, it's a riot, isn't it? Alan Rickman is just in a different film.
A better film, arguably.
What do you make of the Christian Slater revealing that's his Robin Hood's brother? I don't know if is that Will Scarlet canon? And how does that make sense? I was like, what?
Oh, and then one more thing.
That was quite good.
Sean Connery's in it.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Secret Sean Connery, though, right? They didn't tell anyone.
Who's this then? Oh, it's Sean Connery. It's Sean Connery. Oh, it's a riot.
I'm truly shocked, Helen, that this was the first time you watched it. I saw this for the first time 6 months ago when we decided to...
What? How did you escape it in the 90s? It was...
No joke. I watched Robin Hood Men in Tights instead, and having gotten the Mel Brooks interpretation, I felt no need to go back to Kevin Costner for the original source material.
So was that Carrie Elwes and who played...
I've forgotten a lot of the rest of the cast. I remember Carrie Elwes being a big Princess Bride fan.
That comedian who always does anti-trans stuff now.
Oh, great.
Don't ruin my entire childhood, Kobi. Come on.
Just all Googling who was in Robin Hood.
Yeah.
I'll let you...
Dave Chappelle's in it.
Dave Chappelle, yeah.
Oh, right.
Well.
Well, that's not the film we're talking about anyway, so it doesn't matter. I was also a huge fan of Maid Marion and Her Merry Men, and I have a slightly greater affection for Kevin Costner because I think that Field of Dreams is one of the most genuinely moving pieces of cinema that I experienced from my young childhood.
You're the first Brit I've heard say that.
Mate, it wrecks me. I mean, Martin knows that I am very easy to make cry, so, you need to be careful what films you talk about.
Stay away from Guardians of the Galaxy and Oh, There, God, It's Me, Margaret.
Yeah, there's so many films that I need to stay away from. Ideally, I should just be locked in a room and not experience any TV. We decided to watch this with my daughter about 6 months ago, and it is arguably not age appropriate for her, but we had a really good time. I think everything you're saying is absolutely right. Like, it's anachronistic in all sorts of ways. It is very pantomime. Alan Rickman's performance is from Mars, whereas the rest of the film is from Venus. And there's an awful lot of stuff that feels very rooted in this era, the early 90s era, or arguably the late 80s era of action filmmaking. But that said, I found that there were a lot of things that really charmed me. And the main one was Morgan Freeman and the idea that in 1991, you've got this character that is presented as the outsider, scare quotes, the outsider, and is presented as a more considered, more moral, more capable, smarter character than everyone else around him. I thought there's a really interesting central message inside this film that the whole idea of Robin Hood and this idea of English exceptionalism as represented by the Crusades and this moralizing and the attitude of Christianity is fundamentally nonsense. Even if you've got like an American portraying at the beginning, like the one of the first scenes when Costner's like basically volunteers to get his hand cut off is when he says this is English courage, and then immediately pulls his assailant off guard and gets his hand chopped off. So basically, like, English courage is inflicting terrible violence against an Arab nation.
It's been sneaky.
Very, very odd, very strange politics, but kind of silly and charming enough for me to like ride along with it while it makes fun of itself as well. Maybe that's not entirely how it was intending to present itself in original release.
Even with that Alan Rickman, it's fairly light-hearted. You've got like Mike McShane topping up as Friar Tuck and being that's a really fun performance. Yeah, there's a lot of fun performances in this. I think it's. I don't think it takes itself entirely seriously, even though you're meant to take Kevin Costner seriously as a sort of hero and romantic lead.
He's sort of bumbling in places. Like he's sort of shown as capable in some directions, but also like a spoiled rich kid who's like gone away for a gap year and then comes back like really turned on and, concerned about political issues, man.
I think, Helen, you went straight to Sean Connery, but you missed another cameo, which is at the top end in Brian Blessed, who was not allowed to Brian Blessed in the film.
Why did they suddenly cut a section of Blackadder into this film? I was really confused.
It's quite restrained, I thought, for him. Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't think I'm sure just kept the other Kevin, the director, said no, you can't be. Don't scream Gordon's alive. There's no need for that in this film.
Rein it in, Brian.
One actor we talked about Maid Marion and the Merry Men, and I'd like to get your guys' opinions on other depictions of Robin Hood. But one actor who played Snooker in Maid Marion was actually in this kind of as a cameo, played a character called Hal, who was in the stocks at the end. One of the people who was saved, and he was there. And he didn't get. I don't think he got many words, but he got a couple of words to say.
Oh, that's interesting, because I spotted Howard Lou Lewis, who plays Rabies in Maid Marion.
Oh, was he Rabies? Oh, who's Snooker then? Oh,
he doesn't get anything to say in. Oh, is that what you thought Snooker was?
Yeah, sorry, I misnamed him. Yeah, so Rabies then. That's completely right. Yeah.
Yeah, and interestingly, like Maid Marion does predate this by a few years, so it's a strange order to cast that person in. Well, like I said, I think my main exposure to Robin Hood is the Mel Brooks version, which is arguably backwards.
Yeah.
But I think probably baked into that is me viewing the whole story as a little bit silly, and paired with Maid Marian and Her Merry Men, where in that story, Robin Hood is a preening buffoon whose reputation is entirely unearned and everyone else around him is doing all the hard work. I think I mostly see this story as anachronistic in any way. He's not a folk hero in my mind. He's kind of a bit of self-aggrandizement in some ways. How about you guys, though?
For some reason, every time I think of like Robin Hood on film, I think of Russell Crowe, even though I haven't seen the Ridley Scott. He just kind of looks a bit more what I think Robin Hood might look like when he's standing next to Kevin Costner. I don't really know if that makes sense.
I think this is kind of what I mean, because when that film came out, and there's been another one since then, I've just had no interest going to watch them. And I remember when this came out, it was kind of billed as a serious Robin Hood. And then when we watch it back, you're like, no, this is pantomime. In the same way,
compared to Errol Flynn, who's the iconic 1950s, 1960s Robin Hood in Hollywood, right?
And in a similar way to when I rewatched Batman, Michael Keaton Batman, I remember going back to it thinking, I remember this being like a really hard-edged Batman, but no, that's pure pantomime from start to finish. But obviously compared to the Adam West one, it's not. So in comparison to these Errol Flynn and the other ones, I think that's where it's coming from.
Well, I think Robin Hood is a parable, isn't it? It's a story about heroism and about how these people can join together and overthrow injustice and oppression. You know, I mean, I guess because of the time it was written, it's like, well, we overthrow the bad king and get the good king. You know, so that's like it doesn't quite ring true to me. But in terms of like telling that parable of like, here are a bunch of people who have no weapons and no training, and this guy, by setting an example of courage, can bring them all together to overthrow tyranny. That's quite a nice one. Also, I just want to say really quick, I really like the Ewok village. It's really cool. And I think if you view it as a kind of, and as I say, they've made some attempts to try and bring the parable up to date by making it a little, in terms of representation of women and non-white people, it's a little token, but they have tried a bit to bring it up into the 90s.
Yeah.
And if you interrogate it very deeply, there's all sorts of problems with it, but as a kind of a romp and a parable, it works pretty well. It's sort of weird to be like, the best thing about this film is an incredibly hammy performance, but Alan Rickman is so fun. And the scenes he's got with Geraldine McEwen, who plays the witch, his mum, like there were scenes where she's like holding a dead like animal and like desperately trying to regain control of the scene, and they're both just chewing the scenery, but it's really fun. And I think if it was just the sort of very like, you know, doughy-eyed Kevin Costner, I don't think he's bad in this. I don't quite get the appeal. Like if it was just him, if it didn't have that sort of ridiculous pantomime quality in the humor, it would be a less fun film, just be a set of set pieces.
It's interesting to think that most people will know Alan Rickman for Die Hard, which was from 1988, 3 years earlier. And in that, there are big hammy moments, but mostly he's quite a credible image of like violence and danger and threat. And to a certain extent, I feel that he's able to trade on three things in this role. He's able to trade on his image as the stereotype of the British bad guy. He's able to trade on that Die Hard performance, which is an extremely strong and very visceral demonstration of that. And then he's able to go as big and silly as he likes, knowing that he's got those other two things like in his back pocket, as well as Geraldine McEwen as a frankly terrifying, like villainous sidekick.
Yeah. But he looks amazing. It's also like I watched this with a group of people. We came around and we watched the film together. And like Alan Rickman looks super hot in some of those scenes. Like he's got this really like figure hugging like stuff going on. Like when he's kind of moving around and sword fighting, he just looks beautiful. Like he's funny and hot. It's great.
Well, Kevin Costner did apparently pick up on that and wasn't entirely pleased that he kind of took this role and ran with it. And ultimately that is what most people talk about when they talk about this, is what they remember from watching it as a kid, is how kind of crazy the two performances were. But out of the gulf that is there, it's the Rickman one that people look back with real fondness on, I think.
It needs the connective tissue of like a real story. Like it needs a straight man to be a hero as well. Like it wouldn't work if it was just Alan Rickman being wild-eyed and cancelling Christmas and killing people with spoons. But in that context, it is rightly remembered as a really fun performance, I think.
So what is it about the second half, guys, that we liked so much? Because I don't
Fire.
The explosions were quite crazy.
What happens? There's so much setup, isn't there? There's a huge amount of setup and foreboding and like, oh, it's terrible what's happening to England because of this guy. And then I think it's really in the second half that Rickman starts to become comically villainous rather than just like a bit of a douche. That takes off. And then there's a lot more action with, I think the Will Scarlet thing is a nice little plot point. Like, why is Christian Slater like constantly negging Kevin Costner? Like, oh, it's because he's a half brother through an illegitimate thing that, and you even they even plant that early on. They're like, oh yeah, when my father remarried, I made him give up his wife because I was such a sport little brat. And then you find so there's just more happens. It's not all just like, who are all these characters? Here's this scene. Here's 15 characters. Okay, we're going to kill a couple of them, but here's like 13 characters you have to kill.
There's a bit where he fires 2 arrows in one go. That was cool.
Yes.
But yeah, the archer comes in really late, right? Like you see him sword fight and you see him quarterstaff, but you don't know that he's a really good archer until like an hour or something in when he starts training them, the other Ewok.
Until the montage. Until we get the montage.
Here's how to make an arrow. Here's how to shoot it.
Yeah, that's all you need if you are, planning an uprising. The one bit from the first half that I did miss was the relatively early death of Michael Wincott's Guy Gisborne.
He was great.
He's really good, right? I mean,
really good performance.
It was a real shame because he was doing everything that Rickman's doing, but he was also very incredibly dangerous, but also vulnerable and weak. And I was sort of sad that he didn't make it through to like the climactic end.
Because it's creepy. Like you sense a character. I mean, you really get the sense of a character driven by his own cowardice and bullying, and that's a really interesting conflict because he's a nasty dude, but like he also will run at the first when he feels like he's not gonna win. It's good. And also a bit of characterization.
And also, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio is given slightly more to do in the first half. I mean, or at least when she shows up, she's given more grit, she's given more personality, she's given like independent thought. And then as we move through to the climax of the film, she falls much more into that.
She just becomes a damsel in distress.
Exactly, which is disappointing. The thing that I wondered was whether you thought this looked like a blockbuster. There's an awful lot of stuff where people are wandering around in forests and various out-of-work jobbing actors are holding staffs and going, yes, I agree. No, you shouldn't fall in the river, all that kind of thing. Where I went, this looks incredibly cheap by some standards, even with the Ewok village being set on fire. And it was only once we got into the castle where I went, oh, here's the production values. Here's the scale of what I think of being a Hollywood like mainstream action film.
I agree with you. And also when I was watching it in this version as it's shown on Netflix, I thought it was very, very murky.
Yes, possibly.
I was like, is this just a VHS copy that was just kind of scanned and put onto Netflix? And I think that's the first time I thought about that whilst watching the film. This is going to probably play into the small screen score later on. But I do agree with you. It does. So there's a few ways that it notches up in production value, in action, in explosions, in just things being super frenetic towards the end. And Robin Hood shown how to shoot a bow and arrow to save his half-brother's life, that is a really good action set piece that kind of finalizes and caps off that kind of storming of the whole guard. And it's like a heist movie as well. You got Little John taking part, Little John's wife, like transferring the knives over, they're climbing the thing to get to the place, to jump into the hay, and then to spread the knives out to people. It is.
It's very satisfying, isn't it? All that stuff. And how it goes wrong as well.
It had a budget of 48 million, so it wasn't like a cheap film, by all means.
Not at all.
It became the second biggest grossing film of 1991, so it took nearly 400 million.
What was the first?
Terminator 2, isn't it?
Terminator 2.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's fair enough. Absolutely fair enough.
Yeah. I think it is like a weirdly useful document of its time. Like it's a manufactured big budget Hollywood blockbuster, right? Like it's intended to take in big grossing. They put in a lot of money. They plan this to be a big deal. And as a result, you see all of the fingerprints of what Hollywood thinks is a good idea at this time. And whether it's human whiteboard casting, or whether it's like the sexual politics of the era, or whether it's letting Alan Rickman do exactly what he wants and bring Ruby Wax to a Pizza Hut to rewrite the dialogue. Like this is like an example of how the film industry is working at this time for me.
I also, just to, obviously, we need to talk about the score. We need to talk about the main song.
Oh, yeah.
And the melody of the song is in the film all the way through.
Yeah.
And I was like, is that how they do that? Is that how they kind of seeded it? So you watch the film and then you hear someone singing along to the melody afterwards, and then those two together make some kind of explosive mix that is like the best combination of how to monetize a film at that time. But it was there all the time. It's just like
yeah.
I don't know the story of I guess when I'm getting to the point, I don't know the story of the song. Like, did the song come afterwards, or did the song come before? And they were just given like, here's some notes. Can you make a song based on this?
Well, I wondered. I mean, the place that it really pinged out was when Marion first kisses Robin.
Yeah.
And you get not just the song, but you get a little line of dialogue where Marion is telling Robin that he has to do all these things for England, for the king. And he says, I won't do it for any other reasons. I'll do it for you. And I was like, that's a great bit of Brown synergy. Yeah. I would do anything for love. I would do anything. No, hold on. That's too confusing. But I thought that's a lovely bit of like writing synergy. And I did wonder which came first, whether that's script writers going, let's shoehorn this lyric into it, or whether that's Bryan Adams picking up on the a little bit of dialogue.
Did you guys buy the single?
Absolutely not.
I bought the Men in Tights single.
Was there a Men in Tights single?
Hit. No, of course there wasn't. Of course there wasn't.
I didn't buy the single, but my dad had the album, so I listened.
So is this a Bryan Adams album, or is this a Robin Hood Men in Tights album?
Yeah, it was the Bryan Adams album.
Okay.
Oh, interesting. So interestingly, it says that the Bryan Adams song is based on the instrumental love theme written by Michael Kamen.
Yeah,
really? There we go.
So Michael Kamen, who also did the Karate Kids soundtrack.
He's done a load of stuff, Michael Kamen, right? Like, he was quite a big soundtrack writer in the late 80s and 90s, I think. But yeah, like, so he'd obviously heard the theme and then written the lyrics. I don't know if he would have seen, like, rushes of the film or what, but so I don't know whether he took the lyric from the script.
Is this an anti-needle drop then? Is it literally like the opposite of putting down a song in a film? It's picking a song up off the cutting room floor.
Yeah, can I have this?
Do you need that line of dialogue? Because I could repurpose that.
Well, one of the songwriters of the song, Robert Lang, which you may not know him, but he was responsible for the Shania Twain album Come On Over. He wrote a lot of songs for that.
Oh. Is that someone that contains That Don't Impress Me Much?
Yes, it was that one. And he's also written stuff for Britney Spears.
He's like a producer, right? He produced like everything in the 90s. Every rock record that you can think of, like his name would pop up on as a producer or a mixer or something like that. He was really huge.
So am I the only person that bought the single then?
I think you might be, Kobi.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry, kids.
I'm sure it's there. My parents gifted me we had like a small vinyl collection box, vinyl box for the singles. And it's at my parents' house still. I'm sure it's still in that box. So if I do uncover it, I will post it on the chat on Instagram or Twitter to prove that I bought it.
You seemed really shocked at the small number of weeks it spent at number one. I was wondering how many copies of the single you had bought over That's amount of time.
Once.
It's 16 weeks. It's a long time. It's the number one.
Oh, it's insane.
Nothing has beaten it.
Are you saying
Wet came
16,
close.
1-6, or are you saying 6-0? Okay, right.
Wet was 14, I think, with Love Is All Around, and nothing's come.
Whitney Houston.
How long did We Don't Talk About Bruno stay at number one? Because I listened to Radio 1 and they were tired of playing that song.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I really enjoyed it at the time.
I love the song. Netflix, normally Netflix, you watch the end of a film and then it cuts off the credits and plays you some trailer for a film you don't want to watch. Played the whole thing. And I got to sing along to the whole song. I really enjoyed singing along to it.
Finally, that feature
song
on Netflix pays off. That's the worst feature ever.
It's got great guitars in it. It's great.
I just remember hating it so much at the time. It's so middle of the road, and it was just everywhere.
But also, it's a cacophony, like it's everywhere.
It's a hand-on-heart ballad, Martin. You don't like ballads.
It's fine. It's like Kevin Costner's face. It's fine. I don't mind people liking it, but it's not for me.
Before we move on to the scores, anything else that people want to touch on?
Martin.
I just want to say something very quick about Kevin Reynolds, the director, because mostly he's directed really rubbish films like Waterworld. I mean, I guess probably because it was...
Oh, man. Waterworld, we can't get into Waterworld now, but I would love to get into Waterworld now.
There's a good blank check episode on Waterworld.
Yeah? All right. Well, I'll meet you there.
So mostly films I do not plan to watch, even under the auspices of a podcast. But he did direct, his first film was a film called Fandango from the 80s, which I really like, which is a story set in 1971, a bunch of college students who are like graduating, and they get drafted for Vietnam, and they decide to take one last trip across America before they get sent off to fight. And it's really good. It's like a small kind of character-driven story, and it has some really great moments, and totally at odds with everything else I know about his later film career. But yeah, go check that out.
Or should we get into the decimal points?
Let's get into the scores.
Let's do it.
Right.
I'm Sam Clements, host of the 90 Minutes or Less Film Festival, another podcast in the Stripped Media family, a podcast that celebrates movies under 90 minutes long. Each episode, I'm joined by a special guest who selects a movie to join our prestigious lineup. Past guests have included fellow Stripped Media family members Martin and Sam from Song by Song, and Kobi from Flixwatcher, and Dave from The Wire Stripped. Search for us now on the app you're currently listening to this podcast, or join us at 90minfilmfest.com.
We return to the patented Flixwatcher scoring system. How's that patent paying off for you guys, by the way? Are you getting many residuals or?
Like every day. Every day.
Managing to nail down scoring things out of 5. I'm really impressed that you managed to do that. There will be scores for...
our hosts. Today.
I feel I've gone so far. It's my last opportunity to appear on this show. Get my money's worth. We're going to give scores out of 5, each for recommendability, repeat viewing score, the small screen score, engagement score, and an overall score based on those. Kobi, as this was your choice, why don't you start us off with its recommendability?
I'm super flabbergasted the fact that Sam hadn't seen it before 6 months ago and Helen hadn't seen it before. This is for me, it's just like, whoa. This kind of means I think it needs to have a high recommendability score.
You need to do this a lot earlier, but still.
Yeah. So I'm going to give 4.5 because I don't think I watched this more than once as a kid. I think it was just a song that carried me through it all the time, but I had a laugh with it. And I think a lot of people will also enjoy it. And typically when you watch something later in life that was like big in this heyday, I'm talking like Princess Bride for Helen, like Midnight Run for me, when I watched them well after it was kind of their peak. It's kind of, what's the fuss about? But it's interesting to see that both Sam and Helen were like, yeah, it's a bit of a romp. So for that, I think 4.5, I'll give it slightly higher than I thought I was going to give it when I first started.
Fair enough. Helen, how do you feel about The Prince of Thieves?
We must be like the last people on earth who probably seen it. I don't know who I'd recommend it to who hasn't already seen it, and I don't know. It's a weird one. I think
But here's the point. I would have thought everyone had seen it, but this is clearly not the case. 50% of the people hadn't seen it before this year on this podcast.
If that's representative, there's literally billions of people out there who
exactly.
are in Robin Hood principally.
I feel I am an everyman in this context, yes.
I mean, he's just really hammy and really silly. Watching it with like 23 eyes, I think it was a bit better than I expected. The first half was pretty slow, and then it kind of gets a bit more fun when there's a bit more action in it. You know, and Alan Rickman is really fun in it. So I think I give a 3.7 for recommendability.
Martin, how would you recommend Robin Hood to people?
Well, I mean, as we've sort of touched upon, but not dwelled upon, there is a scene of attempted non-consensual sex played very much for laughs in a very pantomime style. If that's something that's going to piss you off, that's entirely reasonable. Don't watch this film. And there are some slightly iffy politics, but generally it's pretty rewatchable. I'd say 3. I mean, I wouldn't say rush out to watch it, but generally it's an entertaining diversion.
Don't rush, but wait until before your 42nd birthday. That's the vibe I'm getting. I had a good time with this. This was something that loomed large in the public consciousness, and I was really pleased to get around to seeing it. I found a lot to enjoy and clearly recommended it sight unseen for my 9-year-old daughter as well. So I can't really go too low based on the evidence in front of me. I'm going to go 3.9. I think it's Martin's caveats notwithstanding. I think that there's an awful lot that people would have a good time with in various directions.
As a general rule, I wouldn't recommend films with a PG rating in the 80s and 90s to 9-year-olds if you haven't seen them.
Fair enough.
Because there's a lot of stuff in those films which doesn't pass muster nowadays.
Kobi, I've made so many mistakes as a parent already. Really, this is the least of anyone's worries.
Apparently, James Furman, who was the head of the BBFC in the 90s, said that the greatest regret of his career was passing as a PG.
It's such a strange thing to say.
Like, the marital sex, the dead chickens, like which part? Like
Christian Slater saying "fuck me," he cleared it. Yeah, exactly.
No, but that was cut. Apparently, that was cut.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah,
there was an
didn't
alternative.
say dubbed as like blimey.
You did it. Yeah.
There's some versions where kids would have seen this version.
Yeah.
The idea that I was robbed of the chance of seeing Christian Slater saying "blimey" like a low-rent Dick Van Dyke.
I do love those.
Me.
I love those poor 80s and 90s dubs.
He does do a funny English accent in Austin Powers, doesn't he?
He does.
The sherbet thing.
yes,
So he's been
it's the
practicing it.
This is arguably a
accent.
better English accent than he
Sherbet.
does than in Austin Powers, but again, different show, different topic. Moving on to the repeat viewing score. Kobi, how would you rate this?
Given that I don't actually know how many times I've watched this previously, I'm not sure I can give a proper answer.
Got an accuracy of your own memory score.
Well, it's just merged so much with the top of the pop viewings of the music video.
Sure.
But I think when I watch this again, maybe another 10 years. I don't think I need to watch it again so soon after watching it this time. I think I got everything I needed to out of it again. I should have watched it when Alan Rickman died. That would have been the time to go, I want to kind of recap and see that. So maybe as Morgan Freeman and or Kevin Costner pass away, I might think. That's sorry, that's
what I look forward to,
guys.
So what's that score? I mean, I don't know how to interpret that as a number.
That's a 2.1, 2.4.
2.4. Helen, as this is your first viewing, will you go back to this?
No, not even if any of the major players pass.
I mean, I watched 7 first before.
Oh, absolutely not.
Not you, Martin, with a nervous disposition, but you can watch March of the Penguins. That's a
Sure.
Okay, yeah. I watched Shawshank again.
Yeah. I mean, that's not. Come on, that's pretty bleak.
Everyone in this has got much better films that you could be watching than watching this again. So
Apart from Kevin Costner.
Martin.
I still
Superman.
like The Bodyguard. It's got great songs in it.
Yeah, I went. Yeah,
You know, and
that's worth it. Yeah.
JFK is quite fun. You're into
watching Kevin Costner listen to a 14-minute monologue is more entertaining than this, possibly.
Yeah, a 1, I think.
Oh dear. Martin, I hesitate to ask, how many more times will you watch this whiteboard of a man shoot arrows?
Well, I mean, that's a different question. I think in terms of rewatchability as a general score, I would probably give this like a 3.5 because it was quite a nice party film, like for people to come around and be like, I can't believe what are they doing that? Really? And we had a fun time. We had a real fun time. So yeah, like I can imagine getting together a group of people, especially people who had watched it for a while, wanted to watch it again. Yeah, so it is reasonably rewatchable. It's a decent, like it tells a good story. That's always worth coming back to. Yeah, 3.5.
Anyone in your watch party not seen it before, or had everyone seen it before?
I think everyone had, but maybe not since the 90s.
Decades ago, yeah. Not since millennia.
I clearly have established a pattern where I will rewatch it every 6 months. So it's tough not to give it a 5. No, I think I've established the pattern. I will rewatch this every 6 months at a minimum. That's important to maintain standards. I think I would watch this again. I think I probably will in various ways, shapes and forms, because it feels like while it's not the greatest film in the world, it also is sort of a classic of the era. And like various people have said, there's lots of elements to like. So I think I'm going to give this a solid 4 for repeat viewing, if for no other reason than when it was suggested as Kobi's 300th episode idea, I went, yes, I will repeat view this. So I'd be a hypocrite to give it any lower. Moving on to the small screen score. Kobi, how was the aspect ratio for you?
Well, the aspect ratio was fine. I think it was a murky print, unfortunately. I didn't see this in the cinema when it came out. I would quite like to see this. Felt quite jealous of Martin's watch party of it. Actually, I thought that would be quite a fun way to do, actually. So for me, I think it'd be quite nice to see this in an open-air cinema in the summer, where it's kind of feel where you don't really need to pay attention that much as well. You can just really enjoy the bits and just be having a bit of a chat and natter with your mates, and the sun's going down. So I think it's actually quite a poor small screen score. I think it'd be better in that kind of experience. And also I think it'd be quite fun in this Prince Charles cinema as well.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm going to give it a 2.8.
Helen, how did the screen size affect you for Robin Hood?
I mean, this is like one of those classic VHS movies to me. Like everyone had a copy of it probably taped off the TV rather than buying it properly. So I think for me, it was fine on the home TV experience. So a 5.
Martin, how about yourself? I mean, you watched this on a projector as well for your watch party?
I did. Yeah, it's quite a visual film. It's sort of like lots of action set pieces and beautiful locations, and Seven Sisters down in Sussex. And it's not Sherwood Forest, is it, where they filmed it? But yeah, there's beautiful forest locations, beautifully villages and castles and all sorts of things. So I would say it probably is a bit better on a big screen. I don't think I would particularly enjoy it on like a phone. So,
but what was the collective viewing experience for you with the watch party? Did it elevate it for you?
Oh yeah, the collective viewing experience was great. But yeah, I don't think it would have worked if we'd all clustered around an iPad. So I think this is more of a bigger screen. I mean, like a big telly, but definitely not a phone. So I guess, what is that, like 2.5? Like,
sure.
Sounds fair. Sounds very fair. I found myself really wanting a bigger screen, especially for the second half, or rather the final third, the climactic, final reel with all of the plot threads coming together and lots of fighting and slow motion, arrows on fire and all that kind of thing. So I was a bit sad, really.
Arrows on fire, yeah.
Arrows on fire. We didn't talk about the fact that the Sheriff of Nottingham hires an army of Celts from the extremely nearby Scotland, presumably.
We didn't mention. Scottish people drink the blood of their dead.
I've heard that. One person told me that. Possibly Ruby Wax gave me that information. And obviously Hadrian's Wall is but a hop, skip and a jump from Sherwood Forest. But then they all get murdered, and then he brings in a bunch of English archers with flaming arrows to burn down the Ewok village. So I don't know why he bothered with it. Anyway, listen, we should have talked about that earlier. The small screen score, though, while I enjoyed it a lot, and while I agree with Helen that it's a classic of VHS, I think it would be significantly better, particularly in the second half, on a larger screen. So I think I can't give it more than a 2. And finally, for engagement, Kobi, how did it grip you?
Because it's almost like watching it from new again. I was kind of waiting for the key bits, kind of the key puzzle bits to slot in versus not remembering other bits to fit in. I was pretty tightly in with this from the start. It seems like the Kevin Costner not knowing what Robin Hood not knowing what a telescope is.
I don't think Kevin Costner knows either.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just documentary footage.
And then getting a sword out to stab these people who suddenly appeared close. I was like, what is this Morecambe Wise bit that's happening?
Small, far away, small, come on, Google.
Now that I can
I'm
see
never
them
selling
closing-
no screams going that fast.
So there was lots of these incidental bits as well. Like, I didn't remember that Marion was a ninja when she first started, and her maid in waiting was quite an interesting character as well. There's lots of these little bits and pieces which were kept it kind of tooting along at a decent pace, and then it just did like a hockey stick curve at the end with explosions which are unnecessarily large for the time, but still make for a good film. So yeah, give it 4.2. I was in there. I was really enjoying this.
Helen, how was your engagement for this one?
I mean, I enjoyed it. I mean, I got all that in whilst also reading quite a lot of stuff about Wikipedia and about Kevin Costner's stunt double. I wasn't that engaged. The first half is quite slow. A lot of things just felt very, very stretched out. So I'm going to give it a 2 for engagement. I enjoyed it. I had fun, but you don't need to sit there with... You could easily be having a party and chatting with your friends and having it on and still know what's going on without watching it properly.
You could enjoy this without having to watch it. Gotcha. Martin, how did it hold your attention?
Same. I felt the same. First half was a bit slow. Second half was pretty fun, quite exciting towards the end. So I think I'll probably average out to like pi.
3.1.
How many different places?
We can get to 5. That's 3.1.
3, 1, 4, 1, 5.
9.
No, 2654 on that. No, you don't want to go any further. No, okay,
I didn't think it deserves it really.
Hold it back for other scores. I found myself genuinely engaged by this both times that I watched it in the last 6 months or so. There's a few elements that really catch my attention. I don't disagree that it gets quite slow. I'm really charmed, impressed, engaged by the portrayal of all of the scenes with Morgan Freeman.
You had some good scenes with Fry Tuck, for example.
Well, so this is the one I was going to talk about. When he performs the C-section for Little John's wife,
Funny.
And at the end, and Friar Tuck is like, this is a terrible idea. There's this lovely scene where they come out and Friar Tuck says, although I may think I am godly, I am not worldly. And he totally it's a rather beautiful little scene where this quite pompous character admits vulnerability and failure and ignorance in the face of this, again, this image of the quote, other, the outsider. And these little moments, as well as the big climax, really did grab my attention and go, this is a very interesting film. This has got all sorts of bits that really do catch my attention. Admittedly, there was also an awful lot of very boring fluff and walking around and talking about pompous things that lost my attention equally. But I think I'm going to give it a solid 4 again, because every time I thought it was out, they pulled me back in. So totting up all of those scores, we are brought together with an overall score of 3.22759.
Oh, thank God. I thought we were going to score it higher than The Irishman for a minute. I was like, that is
Only just.
unfair. That would be an injustice.
There's very little threatening of cutting anyone's heart out with a spoon in The Irishman, despite Martin Scorsese's greatest intentions.
I can see Al Pacino playing that Sheriff of Nottingham character.
I had a funny story actually about where that hoo-ha comes from. You got 30 seconds for a little Al Pacino story?
Sure.
A friend of mine went to dinner with him, part of this fancy sort of like tour that he's doing, and they got to hang out and that thing. Apparently, one of the stories was that he had heard the "oorah" shout as one of the things that Marines like. It's a shout of acknowledgement, and particularly when they're doing that, like the technique for, according to Pacino anyway, the technique when you're cleaning and taking apart and reassembling a rifle. And it was something that people used to shout. And so he just decided to do it on a whim on one take. And it became like the cornerstone of his entire career, which
won him an Oscar.
Yeah, you got to be careful what you say on screen. It really can take over a personality.
Which film is that in? Is that Scent of a Woman?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
Sorry. Terrible film.
Yeah.
It's not good.
Maybe for episode 400, you can move on to that one. Right. Let us head over to Twitter then and see what the Twitterati think about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. Kobi, any you want to draw our attention to?
Yeah, so this is from Amelie, the only Cleo Luna, who says, one of our family staples when I was a kid, I had a soft spot for the film. Love Alan Rickman as a villain, obviously, and love the 3 main male actors too. So throwing some shade on Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio there. You can't think of the film without mentioning you can't think of that film without mentioning the illustrious Bryan Adams hit too. And we mentioned it plenty of times. Did she give a score? She gave it at least 3 stars when prodded by Helen.
There's one that's coming quite late here from Rhys Hayward, who says, impressive how he got from Dover straight to Hadrian's Wall, utter drivel, 1 star. It's really funny. If you look at the IMDb page for this, there's so many people complaining about like historical accuracy. Like he says we'll be in Sherwood by dinner time, but yet they go from Dover to Hadrian's Wall back to Sherwood. And it's just like the temperature required to smelt the metal necessary. It's like, if you're looking for historical foundry information, do not go to Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. This is not a factually accurate film. It's a romp.
A later Kevin Costner film obviously posited that the entire world was covered with water, so clearly geography is not his strong suit in any way, shape or form.
I did take a pause of that smelting of the metal. There was like, what is that? Gallium? I don't know what is that.
They're making arrows out of mercury.
The science.
Yeah, exactly.
But some people were like, "Oh, it could have been tin," but then that wouldn't have been very, very hard. Anyway, it's just like, come on, guys. Obviously, it's nonsense. Like, and they're casting it in wood. Wouldn't this burn out?
Big smelter community, very interested.
It wouldn't be sharp anyway. It wouldn't come out sharp.
Yeah, like what's the point of having a metal if it's a soft metal? Because it's not. It just
they sharpen it afterwards. There's a whole shot of them sharpening it. Didn't you notice that shot?
Yes, I know, but it would bend the arrow if it's a soft. Anyway,
Sam Inglis, 24 FPS UK, says loved this as a kid, but now it's really obvious how miscast the human whiteboard Costner is. Sorry, that's me. Still a fun watch though for Rickman, Freeman, and for the entirely practical action scenes. Sam, when he was 10, would have given it 5 out of 5, no question, but now 3.5 out of 5, so still very solid.
I think that's a good point, actually. This was a time when like CGI action wasn't really. I mean, I guess same year as Terminator 2, right? That's the beginning.
There's no CGI in that at all.
No, that's just Robert Patrick in a really shiny suit. He's a contortionist.
Kind of folds down really quickly.
Yeah, exactly. But that is the beginning of like CGI action films. I mean, CGI existed before that, but that was like a big one because it was like $110 million or whatever, like huge CGI film. James Cameron, obviously, a huge champion of CGI. But like before that, it would all be practical action scenes, and they're really good. They're really good practical action scenes.
Yeah. So that brings us to the end of Robin Hood. Robin Hood, the Disney, which one made Marion and her very unhappy men. and also the end of this special 300th episode for Flixwatcher. I've really enjoyed coming back on the show and also getting to do all of the bits of text. Thanks to mighty people. That's all I wanted to do in my entire life.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. Yeah.
Thank you very much for being the co-hosts, taking over the guest host for this episode. And everyone who's listening, if you haven't heard Sam and Martin before, do head over to Song by Song Podcast. It is a fabulous podcast. Helen and I have been on it a while ago. So if you want to segue in, then go down your podcatcher, type in my name, type in Helen's name, and you can get to those episodes.
The best episodes.
Some would say. Some might say.
Very good.
But otherwise, there's a lot there. And I should say, each episode is pretty short as well, typically. So you get a lot of bang for buck.
We try and keep it focused. 5 or 10 minutes per song. You can't. No. I mean, a 2-hour film, 2.5-hour film. There's lots to talk about.
Yeah.
3-minute song. I mean, how interesting.
Talking for an hour about a 3-minute song would feel slightly self-indulgent. So we try
and yet we've done it so many times.
Mostly 20-minute episodes. Some of the films are longer because films are longer than songs. It turns out.
That's how it works. No, but it's been lovely to join.
Except for that Bryan Adams song, which feels like it's 2.5 hours long.
It's been a treat to chat to you, though. Good luck with the next 300, guys. We'll see you again in a few years.
We're clocking in episode 600.
Thank you so much.
Cheers, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoyed this episode of Flixwatcher podcast? Why not leave us a 5-star review on iTunes? You can also follow us at FlixWatcherPod on Twitter, and we're at FlixWatcher on Instagram. Thanks as always to the mighty people for their mighty tunes and Rockwood Audio's editing skills. If you're looking to get your podcast edited as sweet as this, get in touch with Rockwood, ROKK Wood Audio. Tell them Flixwatcher sent you.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.